afternoon from New York City. A very big warm welcome from the AWA Agora show team. We are very happy to welcome you all for our next episode, for this episode of season 2. This is the 4th episode this season. We are delighted to host Dr. Mariana Figueiro. She is the current director of the Light and Health Research Center at Mount Sinai Hospital here in New York City. And previously, she was the director of the Lighting Research Center in upstate New York at Rensselaer Polytechnic. She has written over 120 scientific articles and technical papers on photobiology, circadian rhythms, old age, and how you can use lighting for health. Has done some really fantastic work over the last two and a half decades on this topic. And she has recently started at Mount Sinai, and we are very happy to welcome her to New York City.
Abhay, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. We know each other for a long time from the Lighting Research Center, and you're an alum, I'm an alum, and we will always carry that in our hearts. So
That's for sure.
We're part of the same family, being alums. So thank you very much for having me here. I guess what I'll do, I'll share the presentation, and then we can either talk during the presentation and certainly after I'm done with the talk.
Fantastic.
Sounds
So
good.
feel free to post your questions, guests, in the chat, and we will address it, as we go through in an organic manner. So we won't wait till the end of the talk. And so thank you, Mariana. Over to you.
Well, thank you. Again, thank you very much for having me here. And this is just a brief overview of some of the work that we've been doing, including the work that we're doing during the pandemic. We did a pretty interesting survey that I'll share with everybody. So first of all, let me acknowledge Abhay and his colleagues for inviting me to be here, and our project sponsors. A lot of the work you'll see here has obviously been done with funding from federal government and others that have allowed us to collect some of these pretty cool data. So as Abhay said, I was at the Lighting Research Center actually since 1996. And last year, I made a bold move. And the bold move was really because we have been expanding a lot in this light and health area. And if you don't know RPI or Rensselaer, it is in upstate New York, and it's mostly an engineering school. So while it's amazing to have the technical sort of group with us, we felt like we needed to expand and come up with a clinical arm. And that's what we did. We actually moved to the Department of Population Health Science and Policy at Mount Sinai. The cool thing, though, is that we are keeping a satellite office in Troy, New York. So there are 18 staff members from the Lighting Research Center that are moving to Mount Sinai, but they're moving virtually. So in other words, they're going to be Mount Sinai employees, but they're going to continue in Troy, New York. So we're going to keep the technical part, all of the resources and the capability that we had before is going to continue, and we're going to expand in the clinical area, which is really an area that I think the lighting industry is craving for, which is really looking at more of the field work, the field research, and collecting more data showing the benefits that light has on human health, as well as we're going to continue work in things like UV and disinfection, plant health. So we've been doing a lot of work with using light to reduce pathogens in plants. And we're going to continue the work with transportation and outdoor lighting. Dr. Bullo will come to Sinai in June. So we're going to continue and expand that area. So it will really be, I think, the next 30 years of the Lighting Research Center with a new sort of home institution. So that's just sort of a brief overview, because I know there's a lot of questions about that transition. So let me give you just a brief background of the premise of the work. And again, today I'm going to focus more on the health and the light and human health part, which is some of the work that we have started at the Lighting Research Center and continue now at Sinai. So we know that circadian rhythms are every rhythm in our body that repeats at approximately every 24 hours, circles about Ds a day. Circadian rhythms, they are generated and regulated by a biological clock in the brain. And this biological clock really has a direct input from the external environment through our eyes. And light dark are the major synchronizers of circadian rhythms to the local position on Earth. So when we used to travel multiple time zones, it is the light dark pattern at destination that will slowly reset the timing of your biological clock so that you re-entrain or resynchronize with the local time wherever you are on Earth. Now, one of the very well-known circadian rhythm is the sleep-wake cycle. And we really don't think much because in general, if we are synchronized, if we're not traveling multiple time zones, we as diurnal species, we're supposed to be awake during the day and asleep at night, and that's supposed to happen every day. So that's sort of a best case scenario. It's what we call circadian entrainment, which is you're doing the right thing at the right time. Now, we know that this is not always the case. And when this is not always the case, the sleep-wake cycle, it's probably one of the first ones that is affected or negatively affected. So when we travel multiple time zones, not being able to sleep at the right time is one of the first things that we notice, among many other things, but the sleep is one of the first thing. So that's why I chose to talk a little bit about sleep, because sleep is something that we know very well, we cherish, and in a way we can measure. So we can talk a lot of biological rhythms. We could talk about productivity. We could talk about hormone production. We can talk about a lot of things, but the sleep-wake cycle, it's really something that we can measure. We pay attention to it, and it directly affects us. I mean, the following day of a bad night of sleep, you have the negative consequences of that. So that's why I think this is a very nice theme to talk about. So the sleep-wake cycle, it's actually regulated by two processes. In fact, there are some modeling that say that are three processes. You have the sort of the sleep inertia, which is that inertia you feel when you first wake up. But the general ones, the sort of the most recognized ones are the circadian and the homeostatic. Okay, so the circadian is really your biological clock, which sends you an alerting signal during the daytime hours and a sleeping signal at night. That's as simple as that. So what your biological clock, when it's on a daytime mode, what it's doing is telling you, stay awake, stay awake, stay awake. At night, when it switches to the nighttime mode, it suddenly say, go to sleep. So that's when you typically fall asleep, because in addition to receiving that signal from your biological clock, the other thing that's happening is you're increasing your homeostatic system with time awake. So the homeostatic system is like a reservoir. When you first wake up in the morning, you have very little sleep pressure. As the day goes by and as the hours awake accumulate, you increase that sleep pressure. So at night, when you fall asleep and you're an aligned person, it's perfect because your biological clock stops sending you an alerting signal and you have very high sleep pressure. Beautiful. It's like a perfect storm. You fall asleep. Now, if this is desynchronized or if this is misaligned, like what, for example, happens with shift workers, you can have a lot of trouble sleeping. Okay. So I guess the first question is, why do we sleep? I mean, we all know it's a wonder when you have a good night of sleep. I mean, it's just absolutely, I mean, sleeping well, it's great. When somebody suffers from insomnia, they're always in a bad mood or they're always suffering because it's very disturbing to have that. So I remember when I first started my PhD, my advisor wanted me to answer the question, why do we sleep? And I said, I want to graduate. Nobody really knows why we sleep. I mean, there's many competing hypotheses, and only now we're starting to understand. But one thing we know, it has to be important because it is the time in which all species are at risk, because you really are dissociated from the environment. You can be hurt. You can be, in the case, if you're a prey, you can be eaten. You're at very, very, very great risk. And yet you need sleep. So it has to serve an amazing purpose. And obviously we're starting to learn. And one of the latest research, which I think has been a really, really interesting research, is the notion that sleep cleans up the debris in the brain that we accumulate during wakefulness. So when we're awake, we're really generating toxins, and we're accumulating these toxins in the brain. And when we fall asleep, your fluid from your cerebral spinal fluid comes up to your brain, and it basically washes out your brain and it cleans up the brain. So it's a very, obviously it's not as simple as I'm saying, but it's, in a way, it's a very elegant way. You're awake, you're active, you're generating all this debris. You fall asleep, you clean it up. If you don't sleep, what's happening is you're not cleaning it up. So you're clogging your brain. And
Hey,
that,
can I ask you a quick question?
of course, of course.
Thank you. The liquid from your vertebrae goes into your brain, right? And basically, it's like using something for your pipes, right? You clean that thing like a
Correct.
drainer for the brain.
Yeah.
So if I were to stand on my head, as we do in yoga, would that do the same thing?
No. That's just, and it's interesting enough, they've done some imaging, and what they see, it's only when you are asleep that your vessels in the brain enlarge, and that you have that, because it is really you're really going, from what they call the brain blood barrier. You are violating that, and you only do it at night. So no, I mean, even though yoga has the positive things, but not for that, at least not that we know.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so the other thing about sleep is that people have done a lot of work with, is that sleep promotes learning and consolidates memory. What's pretty neat about some of these studies is you teach people something in the morning, you retest them in the evening, there's no difference in performance. You teach them in the evening, you have them sleep for 8 hours, and you retest them in the morning, they do better. Now, if you test them in the evening, we teach them in the evening, have them awake at night, and retest them in the morning, they do worse. So those of us who stay all night studying for an exam in the morning, it's probably not a good idea. You're doing better if you just go to sleep, because you're going to consolidate that memory during sleep. So one of the benefits of sleep is that during that sleep, you're basically going through everything that happened during the day. You're throwing away things that don't matter, and your consolidated memory of the things that do matter. So if you want to learn, if you want to have memory, you want to have a good night's sleep. Now, the opposite is true, which is the sleep deprivation. So sleep deprivation has been linked to a series of things, from short-term, like reduced performance, to long-term risk, like increased risk for diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, depression, Alzheimer's disease, and even increased risk for falls, because when you didn't sleep well, you may get confused and you may lose your ability to navigate in the space. So for example, this study here, it's a very well-known study, showed that 2 days of sleeping 4 hours a night decreased what they call the leptin, which is a hormone that it's associated with satiety, and increased ghrelin, which is a hunger hormone. So bottom line is you sleep 4 hours of night instead of sleeping 7 to 8 hours a night, you become hungrier. And that's why you may become more obese. So one of the advantages of sleeping well is it may be that you can control your weight. Now, what's very interesting and why that has to do with lighting and light in the built environment, it's because we have shown that people that receive more light during the daytime hours, and that's a study we did in 5 federal buildings across the United States. We collected their light exposure, and I'm using here the acronym for CS, which is circadian stimulus, which is light that affects the circadian system. And what we showed is the higher the amount of that light, which is a light that affects the circadian system, the better they slept, the less depression they reported having, and the fewer sleep disturbances they reported having. Okay, so that was one of the first studies where we were able to show in the field that if you're getting more light during the day, you are improving sleep at night. So there's a lot of talk about we need to show that light improves productivity. And my point is, I don't know if we're ever going to show that light improves productivity, but if we can show, like these studies, that light can improve your sleep, and if we understand how important sleep is for our health and well-being, it's almost like A equals B, B equals C, then A equals C. So you can probably do an indirect link. Any questions, anything?
Well, there's one that just came in,
Okay.
which is really interesting. How does sleep from a sleeping pill differ from natural sleep? So if I just popped a pill, would that mean that my sleep is not going to be the same as in terms of leptin creation?
Yeah. There has been a lot of work looking at sleep medication. It's very hard to give a one answer to that question because different sleep medications will target different phases of sleep. Okay, so typically you sleep, you have deep sleep in the very beginning of the night, and that's when you dissipate all your sleep pressure, and that's also when you have that consolidation of memory as well as that cleaning up of the brain. And then you have the REM sleep, which is when you are dreaming, which occurs more towards the end of the night. So different medications will target those different sleep, so it will have different benefits. Okay, now I don't know of any studies that said, all right, let's see if you take sleep medication, what happens to your leptin and ghrelin levels. So, you know, I see where it could go, saying, well, if I take sleep medication, I may lose weight. There hasn't been any studies confirming that. So you can't really link these two things. Okay.
Thanks.
All right. So this is actually the survey that we did during the COVID pandemic. So think about it. What happened when we were all in lockdown? We were all forced to work at home. And yes, some of us have beautiful windows that we can sit in front, but some of us are literally working in the basement with barely a fluorescent lamp on the ceiling because that's the only space we have where the cats and the dogs and the kids are not going to go through, you know, our Zoom, and they can still do that. But the point is that some of us we're just not ready for working at home. And based on my own experience, I wasn't getting out either. You know, you wake up, you stay on your pajamas, and you don't go out. You don't even know if it's rainy or snowy or sunny outside because you're home all day. And I said, I wonder how this is affecting how much light people are getting and how much sleep people are getting. So we did this survey where we got very lucky. It got picked up by a couple of TV channels all over the United States, and we had over 700 responses. And the hypothesis was that more light during the day would lead to better sleep and better mood during the pandemic. So we just selected the responses of the people that were working from home or people that were unemployed and staying at home. We did not do, for example, first responders or people that were still going out and working. So it ended up being probably over 600 responses that we got. And the results were actually really neat. So this is the upper graph that I'm going to be showing are all at home light exposure. And the bottom graphs are the time that people spent outside. So we had sort of two questions. How's your lighting at home and how much light you're getting at home? And then we also asked how much time you're spending outdoors. So this is the sleep disturbances. So what you see in the graph here, a 50 number is sort of a halfway. So it's kind of the norm. So anything that it's below 50 is better. Anything that it's above 50, it's worse. And then the y-axis here, the vertical axis, it's sort of a rating that we had about your light at home going from very dim to very bright. So obviously it's subjective, but it was very impressive. As you increase the amount of light that people felt like they were getting at home, you have an improvement in sleep disturbances. Same thing with the outdoor light. The longer time you spend outdoors, where obviously you get more light, the better you were sleeping. So over 1 to 2 hours was always the best. This one is, again, sleep-related impairment, which is another sort of questionnaire about sleep. Same pattern. The more light you got at home or the more time you spent outdoors, you had better sleep. That third one, I don't know because it is covering it. Let me see, I got to take that out. Oh, that's anxiety. So the same thing with anxiety. The more light you got, the less anxiety you felt. Here's more results from that. This was stress. So again, the more light you get or the more time you spent outdoors, the less stress you were feeling. This is depression, similar patterns. And this is positive affect, which is actually the opposite. A greater number is better, okay? So the most impressive part of that survey, you get all these things, sleep, depression, anxiety, everything goes on the same direction. The more light you get during the day, the better you feel. So that underscores the importance of light during the day. Now, these are the general population.
Quick question. Sorry.
Go ahead. Absolutely.
So more light that we get during the day, but just to kind of define that further, would you say that that has to happen like right after breakfast, or what time of the day?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about circadian entrainment, morning light is the best. Okay, so right after you get up, that's when you want to get that light. Now, light also serves as a sort of gives you an alerting effect, which is similar to a cup of coffee. So if you're exposed to light all day, you actually will be perkier all day. Okay, so it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. One of the things that we're seeing from these surveys and from the work we're doing is it's at least a couple of hours, preferably in the morning. Now, if you can't expose yourself all day, and that's particularly true, say in the post-lunch dip, for example, where you get kind of, low, that's a good time to expose yourself as well. So if you can sit by a window to work, but facing a window, that's what you want to get that light, okay? And in the morning, if you can do an hour walk at a minimum, that's also what you want.
And if you were to, and I just kind of extrapolating from that, if I were to do this, super bright light at night, then I'm clearly playing with my sleep cycle.
Correct.
Adversely playing with it.
So you want to minimize the evening light. Now, pay attention that the more light you get during the day, the less sensitive you're going to be to that evening light. So there's a double benefit here. So if you're in darkness during the daytime hours, you're going to be more sensitive to that screen light that you're seeing at night. So that's why daytime light is so important, I think. Okay, and I think we underestimate that.
Yeah. And there's a question, a smaller question. The bigger questions I'm going to keep till the end, is that I would assume that this is natural light versus indoor lighting, right? That go outside for the
Yes,
walk.
go outside and spending time outdoors. That's correct. And the graphs above were inside your home. If you felt like it was bright or not bright. Okay. Now, obviously, this is a survey. We don't have the measurements, but it's 700 people, so it kind of gives you a nice trend at least.
That's a big subject. Okay? Yeah.
All right, so let me share
Great.
it again. We also have been using that light during the daytime hours to help, say, patients and people that are not able to get the light during the day because they're in the hospital or because they're in nursing homes, for example. So this is actually a population we've been working with, which is cancer patients. And more specifically, these are myeloma transplant patients. So these is bone marrow transplant patients. And what happens with bone marrow transplant patients that they stay indoors, whether it's in the hospital. Now they're starting to move a lot of these transplants home, but they tend to stay confined for 2 to 3 weeks because their immune system gets pretty much deprived of any protection and they have to rebuild that immunity. So they become completely isolated indoors all the time. So in this study, we actually did it at Mount Sinai. We built these fixtures where it was actually a pretty neat fixture. It was an uplight and there was sort of wheels, and we were rolling these fixtures on different rooms at Sinai, depending on the patients that were participating in the study. So we recruited 60 patients, 30 patients received the bright light and 30 patients received the control light, which was the same fixture, but not delivering a lot of light. We collected a bunch of outcomes. We collected melatonin because you tend to produce melatonin at night. And when you produce melatonin at night, it means you're entrained because that's what your body's supposed to be doing. If you're not producing as much melatonin at night, for example, shift workers tend not to have such high melatonin production at night. And what that is telling me is that you're kind of desynchronized or out of sync, okay? We collected actigraphy, which is like a Fitbit to look at the sleep patterns. And we collected a bunch of questionnaires probing depression, sleep disturbances, as well as we looked at some immune markers. So this is just the melatonin data. And what you see here, the control group, so we have two graphs here. One is the control group and one is the active group, okay? So the blue bars are the baseline and the yellow bars or the orange bars are after the patients were 3 weeks in the hospital receiving either the bright light or the dim light. And what you see is those that receive the bright light, which is the graph on the left, they tend to increase their melatonin levels at night, and those that received a dim light decreased. So what does that mean? It means that 3 weeks in the hospital disrupted these patients to a point where they were producing less melatonin at night. With the bright light, it was very interesting. We actually maintain that entrainment. Instead of getting much more melatonin, what we did is we kept them as entrained as they were when they first came into the hospital. So we didn't let them get worse, which is something you want. The other thing that we found was that there was a significant decrease in their depression scores. So here you have the depression scores. A high number means you're depressed. This is with the bright light, and this is with the red traces with the dim light. So with the dim light, their depression tend to increase with time in the hospital, and we maintain the depression lower with the bright light, okay, which is consistent with the healthy people in the buildings that we collected in other spaces. The other study that we did was with Alzheimer's disease patients, and that was in nursing homes. So Alzheimer's disease is sort of like a canary, what does it say, a canary in a mine, or
Canary in the coal mine, yeah.
yeah. So they are really, they have a lot of sleep disturbances. They have huge, huge amount of sleep disturbances. And it is one of the reasons why they are actually institutionalized. And there's always this question about the chicken and the egg. Is it the disease that it's giving them the sleep disturbances, or is it what people are starting to now think, that the fact that you don't sleep well, you don't clean up your brain, you are letting these accumulation of toxins increase the plaque in the brain, which is associated with Alzheimer's disease. Okay, so we don't know which one is which, but what we do know is either one is bad, because if you're not sleeping well and that's leading to higher risk of Alzheimer's, or if you have Alzheimer's and you're not sleeping well and you're being institutionalized, both are bad. So we need to find a way to improve that. So what we did is we did 2 studies, and this is one of them that was a 14-week study. And this is what we called a crossover design. What that means is we had an active light, we had a placebo light, and we had a group of subjects that received the active, had a washout period, received the placebo. The other group started with a placebo, had a washout period, and then received the active. So all the subjects received both experimental conditions, the active and the placebo light. We gave the light, I forgot to mention, for the cancer patients, we gave the light just in the morning from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. For the Alzheimer's patients, we gave the light all day, from the time they woke up until 6 p.m. because we really didn't know what the patients were doing, how long they were going to be in the environment. It's very hard to monitor. So I think the important message here for designers is you need to design the environment so that everywhere that these patients are, they are getting the light they need to get. Okay, so you don't need to do one space only. You need to do all of the spaces. And that's really what my dream is for this application. So we collected 46 patients. We worked with 8 long-term care facilities here. So this is just the design what we did. So we collected a baseline data. We turned on the lights for 4 weeks, placebo or active. Then we collected data at the end of the 4 weeks. We had the washout period, and then we reversed it and we repeated the study. What we found was pretty neat. So what you see here, the gray bars are always the baselines, okay? The blue bars are the active light, and the white bars are the placebo light. And the placebo light is really low light levels that are not effective for the circadian system. And you see, this is sleep disturbances. A high number means a person has sleep disturbances. We see a significant decrease in the sleep disturbances with the active light, a little bit with the placebo, but not significantly different. And this is just taking the difference between baseline and active and baseline and placebo. So you see that there's a much greater difference when you have the active light than when you have the placebo light. Same thing with depression scores. You see a decrease in the depression scores with the active light, not a significant change with the placebo light. And same thing with the agitation scores. You see a reduction in the agitation scores, and you see no difference with the active light, with the inactive light or the placebo light. So I think those results are actually pretty impressive. I'm going to finish the 6 month and then I'll stop to see if anybody has any questions. So what we did is we then followed the patients for 6 months on the lights, okay? So you had a baseline without any lights. You turn on the lights for 6 months, and you come back and you collect data at weeks 3, 9, 17, and 25, which was after 6 months of the intervention. And again, it was all day light in the space where the patients were spending most of their time. And what we found, I think, was absolutely incredible. So here are sleep disturbances. This is the baseline, and this is over the course of the 6 months. And this red light here is the threshold for having or not having sleep disturbances. So after 6 months of delivering that light, for Alzheimer's patients that were in nursing homes, so they were already at mid to late stages of the disease, they're getting worse over the course of 6 months. And what you see is an improvement in their sleep, in their depression, and in their agitation. I think these results are absolutely incredible. And I really think that it makes us stop and say, why aren't we doing this in every single nursing home and assisted living facilities, not even in the US, in the world? So
Right.
I'll stop here and see if you have any questions. And
Yeah, there are actually a lot of questions, and we have great attendance today. And I was just wondering if you want to do like a few more minutes on the Daisy
sure,
meter, dosimeter, uh, and the summary, and then maybe we can take. There are about 10 questions, and so
yes,
really,
and I'm almost done, so I can be done in the next 5 minutes, and then we can just go for the questions. Okay, so summarizing here, bright days and dark nights. I think we need to start thinking about how do we return to a more natural 24-hour light dark cycle. Okay. And I think that those of you that attended, I know Mark Ray was talking about the design guide 24480 from UL. And we do have a very nice general methodology on how to implement these things there. So the talk today was more on the science and the studies, but I had done other talks on the implementation, and we can talk about that. But I think it gives you a good sort of general overview and methodology.
Right.
So we have shown in the field that if you deliver that very robust light and dark, and it is light and dark, it's bright days and dark nights, you do see a positive impact in various populations, including healthy population, okay? And remember that lighting for vision is different than lighting for circadian. And we tend to design lighting based on IS standards that were done based on visibility. And we really need to start thinking about how do we deliver light for the circadian in addition to light for visibility. And those are my two questions that I think I would like to expand on the discussion is, are we underlighting our daytime spaces and overlighting our evening spaces? Okay, because the IES recommendations is based on vision, not on circadian. And we need more light to activate the circadian system. And the second thing is, should we think outside the ceiling? In the sense that we as designers think of, how do we put the lights up in the ceiling? And what I'm saying is, to deliver that circadian light, what you want is light at the eye, vertical light close to you, so that you don't have to crank up the lumens, increase glare, increase discomfort. You have to think about light at the eye. How do you deliver that? So we have had a lot of success with things like light tables, light trays, these kinds of lights using colored light that delivers the light, say, close to your computer screen, for example, light around furniture, light around your partitions in your cubicles, lighting walls. So those are the things that I think you can be creative and come up with solutions that would be much, much more effective than just delivering light at the eye or light from the ceiling. And the second thing that I would like, the second message that I would like to come across here is, you also need to start thinking about lighting as a personal light exposure. Like you have your personal trainer for your exercise or your personal nutritioner, you need to have your personal lighting designer or your personal light exposure. Each of us would have our own light based on a sensor that collects our light exposure, that talks to an app that interprets that light exposure, and then can talk to your bedroom, your basement, your cubicle to change the lighting based on your individual needs, because we're all different. We all have different individual needs. Okay, so that's those are sort of the ideas that I wanted to come across and discuss about it. So
Fantastic. Thank you, Mariana. That was really informative. And we have so many questions. I'm going to try to plow my way through.
okay,
And we're already at time. So we'll try to, I think we have 40 people here today, I think they're all interested in hearing what you had to say about their questions. So let me start with one that came in, which is, what if I took a 2-hour nap in the afternoon, like good old fashioned siestas, would that
well,
help in
it,
clearing the garbage in
yeah.
the
So it's interesting. There is a circadian pattern for this cleaning up the brain, and it seems like this fluid comes in only during your circadian night. However, there has been a lot of studies done showing the benefits of napping for helping you with memory and helping you with learning. Okay. So napping seems to be actually positive and seems to be very good. Napping at night in shift workers is even better because what napping is doing is reducing that homeostatic pressure that you have if you have to stay awake all night. And that can make you feel better. Now, napping during the day, you don't want to go too long. You want to do 20 minutes, half an hour, enough to kind of dissipate that rather than going for 2 or 3 hours, because then it becomes a little bit harder for you to get up.
Right. Beautiful. Great. So the next two, well, I'm combining two questions here because they have a similar background. It's connected to a cultural question. So our Western premise about, well, no, you know what? I'm going to read it from the top. What has sleep research enlightened us about waking state psychology in comparison to indigenous cultures that have a very different relationship with what sleep and waking is, which is less rigid and dualistic. And there's another question that's connected to it is there an alternative sleep for human body, like deep meditation? So that's kind of the yogi method, people who just need 2 hours of sleep to keep on going. So it's kind of connected. It's like, and the two who have asked the questions are from two different parts of the world. But it's a very connected question that
Yeah.
it's in the ancient indigenous
Yeah.
knowledge, there wasn't a dualistic system. And, we hear of stories of people just sleeping 2 hours or 3 hours. And, so I'd love to hear your viewpoint on this. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, there has been some work with some of those groups of indigenous and people that never had electric lighting or never really got any civilization. And first of all, they do follow, obviously, the light and dark. So in other words, they follow the sunrise and sunset. That's what they do. But it is true that it used to be that if they were time in bed for 12 hours, the sleep was actually a split sleep where you had first sort of chunk of sleep, then you have a couple of hours that you have a meditation. So they call it quiet wakefulness. And then you sleep again for the second half of the night. So that seems to be something that they used to do. Now, there was another paper with another group, which was very controversial. So the argument was that people like that don't sleep more than we do because they have this 2-hour awake in the middle. And everybody was like, oh, that can't be right because we're in a society where we don't sleep. I can't believe that these people don't have phones and they don't sleep and so on. So there's still a debate out there about that. But I do think that quiet meditation, this was part of our sleep. It simply was, and we lost that. One thing we didn't lost was the siesta, I think, for some cultures. And the siesta is clear. It's during your post-lunch dip when you have sort of, your sleep pressure is getting up. You don't have enough alerting from your biological clock, and you get that dip. Yeah. And the siesta makes sense.
I actually many years ago, before before the LRC and you were doing the circadian thing, I saw a documentary on BBC which spoke about, the whole concept of the Spanish siesta and the
Mhm.
Spanish Don Juan, who's always energetic at night, dancing, etc., that because of the world economy of people, especially there was a documentary on Spain, of them working with different time zones, the Spaniards were not getting any siesta time. So uh, they connected that to how little they were partying at night now.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
it was just kind of interesting. It's like, because they weren't sleeping during the day, they were drinking less alcohol at night, which I don't know, good or bad.
Yeah. What the sleep during the day was doing, it's really dissipating that homeostatic sleep pressure. So that allows you to stay awake a little bit later because you don't have as much sleep pressure as you had if you didn't take a nap.
Right, exactly. All right, so onwards to the next question, technical question. Have they looked at the impact on sleep related to flicker frequency of LEDs, CFLs, fluorescence, etc., as against incandescent, which is flicker free?
Yeah. Um, no, the answer is nobody has done very systematic studies. Now we have done studies, and we're actually expanding that, looking at flicker. Well, we did two studies. One is looking at flashing light, flashing once every 30 seconds. And we have shown that this can actually change your biological clock. So it can actually phase shift your biological clock. So that's one thing. And the second thing is we have been working with a 40 hertz flicker. They call it gamma entrainment, and that has been shown to help with some of cognitive performance. Now, this has nothing to do with LEDs and with the flicker of LEDs or anything like that. I think that the flicker for LEDs it's too fast,
Yeah.
and it shouldn't affect the biological clock or anything like that, because it's just, especially when you go, in the
Yeah.
higher hertz, I don't think you can actually process that information, but there hasn't been any studies on that.
Yeah, there's a whole school of thought about EMI and RFI from these badly made LEDs when they're badly made, how it impacts your health. So there's in an organization called the International Light Association, which we'll be speaking in a month or so. They do a lot of research on just that topic. So I think that's where I would um, get the information to the
Yep.
person who asked the question, because it's very interesting. You're right that it's in the mainstream industry, it's not really impacting your circadian rhythms, but there is some study done on that. So the next question, when you talk about white light, which light temperature do you mean in Kelvin?
Well, it really varies. First of all, when you're talking about the circadian system, you shouldn't be talking about Kelvin temperature. You really should be talking about the spectral power distribution. We do have a calculator that we provide online that if you give the spectral power distribution, the light level, you can calculate the circadian stimulus and see how it's affecting the circadian system. In
Right.
general, though, lower or warmer colors are less effective than cooler colors. Now, if you go from 2700K to 6500K, for example, the
Uh-huh.
difference is about twice the effectiveness. So it's not huge. I mean, it's probably better to get the light source close to your eyes, and you're going to wipe out any effect of correlated color temperature on the circadian system. In general, we've been using, 3,500, 4,000, 5,000K. We haven't used 6,500K as much. So in general, 5,000K is a good light source because it's a compromise between not increasing too much the light levels. Now, I do suggest you start thinking about saturated colors like a 470 nanometer, narrowband light source. That's a very effective light source for the circadian system. You only need about 30 lux at the eye to have a very strong stimulus. So, when you can't do, and you can keep your ambient white and just add that sort of layer of blue, it will be very effective, and it will really won't change your environment as much.
So you're saying a 470 nanometer applied in the morning?
Yes.
Got it.
Anytime during the day, to be very honest.
But don't do it at after
Don't
dinner.
do it in the evening. Don't do it at night. That's correct.
Okay, we have time for two more questions. So the next question is, do elderly people with increasing yellowing sight need more light during the day?
Well, the hypothesis is that yes, because they absorb more light. So in the end, they're going to get less light in the back of the eye. What we don't know is there an adaptation? So in other words, there has been studies where people have worn orange contact lenses, sort of mimicking what happens when you get older.
Right.
And in the very beginning, they see a difference in the response, but after 16 days, there's no difference in the response anymore. So it may be that the system readjusts, okay? So it really is, it varies with individuals. Sometimes the individuals will adjust and it won't make any difference. Other people can't adjust, and those are probably the ones that you're seeing having more sleep problems because they're in dim light. So because we don't know, my recommendation is, yes, increase light levels, go outdoors, spend time outside, because you know you're going to get enough light outdoors.
Super. So for the last question, I know we missed out a few, and if it's okay with you, they can probably just drop you an email and ask the question
Absolutely.
directly. Yeah. And the last question for today is, do the improvements in the ADRD studies, I was also very curious to know this, last beyond the intervention period?
Yes, this is a really good question. And when we did the first study where we had light, washout, and light, the washout was 4 weeks, and we saw some carryover. So some of the patients did not go back completely to baseline. So yes, it does last. Does it last forever? No, but there is a carryover effect without any question.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Mariana. This was
Thanks
fantastic.
for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I've been watching you speak for, we know each other a long time. I mean, we were at the LRC at about the same time, and your talks are always so engaging and so informative. It's just a pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So
All the best
thank
with your new.
everyone for taking the time to attend.
Thank you. And yes, we hope to see you again. And thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for your support. And thank you all for coming. Thank you, Mariana, again. Wonderful to host all of you. And that's all for today. Thanks. Bye.